Victoria Peck-Gray is a registered dietitian trained in a functional medicine approach and the owner of her private practice, Wonderfully Made Nutrition. She helps women reverse metabolic dysfunction to get pregnant naturally, achieve a weight that feels good, and get their energy back, all through a functional medicine approach in which she uses personalized nutrition, advanced lab testing, supportive lifestyle therapies, and targeted supplementation to support root cause healing. She wholeheartedly believes that our bodies are incredible creations, wonderfully made with full potential to function at optimum levels when we nourish them the way that they were designed to be. You can connect with her on Instagram at wonderfullymade.rd and at her website, www.wonderfullymadenutrition.com. Please join me in welcoming Victoria Peck-Gray to the NFP Podcast.
Welcome to the NFP Podcast, where we explore the empowering world of natural family planning. I'm Amy Smith. Join me and my co-host Emily Appledorn each week. Together, we're here to dive deep into the science, the stories, and the spirituality behind NFP. Every week, we push back against the free love culture and advocate for a culture of responsible love, where intentionality and respect are at the forefront of family planning. Join us as we discuss everything from the practicalities of charting and fertility awareness to the profound impact NFP can have on relationships and communities. Whether you're new to NFP or a seasoned pro, our podcast is your go-to resource for honest conversations, expert insights, and real-life experiences. So grab a friend, settle in, and get ready to be inspired. This is the NFP Podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back to the NFP Podcast. It's just Amy today. Emily is with her littles, but I am joined by Victoria Peck-Gray. She's a registered dietitian trained in functional medicine and the owner of her own private practice, Wonderfully Made Nutrition. So welcome to the podcast, Victoria.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you today. So we're going to be talking a lot about metabolic health, and this is one of Victoria's kind of expertise and specialties. And let's kind of frame the conversation. Always, I feel like it's helpful with a definition. What is it that we're talking about when we say metabolic health for women?
I love that.
Or for men. I mean,
yeah, sure.
I imagine it's the same thing, but.
Sure. Yep. It actually is the same thing. Obviously, it ends up showing up in a little bit different ways between men and women, but absolutely the same common denominator, same principles that we need to focus on. So it is really important to define metabolic health because we think, okay, metabolism, metabolic health, they are kind of, in a sense, one and the same thing. And I'll say actually metabolism, I think oftentimes people make the connection to weight, and there is a connection there, absolutely, but it is not all about weight. There is just so much more to our metabolism. So metabolism really is the sum total of all of the processes in the body that utilize and burn and convert food into energy. And that is happening everywhere, every single cell of the body. So metabolism is happening all across the body. It is not any one particular, system or a specific area, location, or system, happening everywhere, and it's impacting everything. So truly, when I say your metabolism is going to impact every single function, every single system of your body, that is true. That's not an over exaggeration. So when that comes to metabolic health, we are trying to improve the health of your metabolism. We could think about, some of these people say, well, I want to raise my metabolic rate. I want to jumpstart that. I want to, put some fire under that metabolic rate. Sure, absolutely. Sometimes that is a problem. Sometimes people's metabolic rates have actually dropped because of other issues going on in their body, or there are just inefficiencies, I would say, with how those processes are working to literally convert food into energy. And so there are a lot of adjacent topics that kind of come out of that. Like I would say, number one being blood sugar balance and insulin regulation. That is probably, well, I don't know if I can say it's the most impactful, but I would say on a practical level, it's something that I probably end up focusing on the most with my clients because it really is something that day in and day out we have to be focusing on. And I would say that another 2 or 3 principles underneath that really impact metabolic health would be our just nutrient levels. So do we have enough nutrients, or are we deficient or insufficient in certain nutrients? So that's a really big one. And number 3 would be inflammation. So are we generally having chronic inflammation going on, or are we spiking inflammation more frequently than we should? Are we eating in a way that is creating more inflammation, or living in a way that's creating more inflammation? It's not always just about the food. So that definitely can suppress and disrupt metabolism. And then maybe I throw a fourth one in there, maybe gut health. You can kind of put that in there. That is going to be impacted by all those other three that I just mentioned. But I do think that it's a strong enough category that actually kind of gets its own category there. Sure.
Awesome. So I think oftentimes, at least in our modern day approach to health, which I think this is like changing slightly, but it seems like we still have this idea that the body is very siloed. You know, we have the cardiovascular system here, we have the reproductive system here, we have the immune system here, we have the metabolism here. Like everything is just like operates apart from itself, which is kind of silly when we think about that. It actually all operates under one roof, with the roof being like our one body. To me, at least, it makes more sense that these systems are more interconnected than we give our body credit for. And I think that there is a lot of conversation moving in that direction of, you know, our metabolic health impacts our cardiovascular health, our brain and our heart health impacts our reproductive system. Our reproductive system doesn't operate unless this other part of our body is operating. So like it's multifaceted. So I'm curious if you could speak to our listeners a little bit about how our metabolic health is intricately connected and related to our ability as females specifically to have healthy ovulatory cycles during our reproductive years.
Absolutely. So yeah, if you think about your reproductive system, in a sense, yeah, so I love what you mentioned, like these systems should not be siloed. And even the way that often conventionally care gets done is that you go to a specialist for a system, right? And you're kind of being siloed in that model for that system. Unfortunately, I'm not going to go into all the details of my gripes with maybe conventional care out there, but there's a lot of issues with that, and people end up hitting a lot of roadblocks, and they're just not there. I mean, if you want to call it like holistic care, like they're not getting that truly holistic care when we are actually looking at all the systems together and saying, if someone, and I'll go into, more detail about kind of reproductive health and how that's impacted by metabolism. But for example, if someone's having, really heavy bleeding, it's a siloed care model would be, oh, let's do something to just shut down that heavy bleeding, right? Maybe it's birth control or something like that. Unfortunately, that does not speak anything, again, to behind the scenes of like, what is that root cause? What's actually driving that heavy bleeding? And it could be something that's not reproductive related. Like, yes, we have to say, okay, it's not just a reproductive system issue anymore. It's something actually beyond that. And I would say metabolic health, 9 times out of 10 is going to have at least some role, if not a very large role in that. So when it comes to reproductive health, the reproductive system, on just a very basic level, I mentioned that metabolism is all the processes that are, converting food into energy. So it's really just this energy production machine going on inside of each one of our cells. So, I mean, for anything to really work, for things to be produced, for things to be manufactured, like our hormones, that requires metabolism. So I'm just on that level, just like the production level, it requires good, efficient metabolism. So just again, just on that level, metabolic health impacts the reproductive system. But then I think the really, really big piece, well, a couple pieces, but one really big one would be the communication. So really hormones are messengers, right? So they're produced in a certain gland, and then they're actually sent out somewhere either far away or even somewhere local, but they're messengers. They're going to go send a signal. So that hormone then has to be received by the place it's going to be received by. So if their estrogen is being sent to, somewhere else in our body, those cells have to receive that estrogen and then also basically convert that message into a function. And that is when a lot of disruption can happen. So in that communication process, why does that happen? So there's actually like just the hormone resistance. So maybe your listeners have probably heard of the term insulin resistance before. That is when our cells are actually not appropriately receiving insulin hormone, which is actually a hormone, but it's a hormone that actually helps with blood sugar control. So that insulin resistance is a real problem because that already starts to cause this miscommunication in the body with blood sugar balance. But actually, again, most of the time, if someone's having insulin resistance, I could almost assume, but I would always double check that they probably have other hormone resistance going on, be that thyroid hormone resistance, progesterone resistance actually is quite common. I think you mentioned endometriosis is a topic that's been discussed recently, hypothalamic amenorrhea. I'm jumping the gun, but in endometriosis, progesterone resistance is actually pretty common too. But so there's just this hormone resistance at the cellular level. Again, that's going to create a ton of issues because even if you're producing the hormones, are those hormones actually getting the job done? No, because of resistance. So that's a huge one, and probably one of the biggest issues I actually often see out there, particularly with insulin resistance, even if someone, and insulin resistance is a spectrum too. So like someone can have very full-blown levels of that, and that could actually, end up becoming diabetes. And that's a very obvious, apparent, the lab markers are very suggestive of that. There's a spectrum. People could be on the lower or moderate end of that, and it's not getting detected because the doctors aren't really looking at those markers. They're not testing all the right tests, or they're just, again, they're not meeting the absolute criteria for like full-blown issues. But of course, we want to optimize before we even get to that point. Additionally, though, another kind of miscommunication in which that can happen in the body where metabolic health can really disrupt that, again, with blood sugar imbalances and insulin dysregulation, that's going to actually disrupt the communication of the brain back to the reproductive system. So really, maybe your listeners know that the brain is actually really like the master conductor of all the hormones in the body. It's not, or with the hypothalamus and then the pituitary gland in the brain, those are different glands. Those are producing hormones, and those are the hormones that kind of those two glands send out hormones everywhere, to the thyroid gland, to the for the ovaries, to our adrenal glands, even our pancreas for insulin production. So really, it's those brain glands that are actually then telling the rest of the glands in the body, hey, go produce hormones, or stop producing. We already have enough, or whatever it might be. But if there's disruption, actually, the brain is constantly kind of picking up signals in the body. And if there's disruption in that process, if the brain is not able to pick up the right signals, it's going to cause a disruption to telling those glands hormones to produce. This is something that I suspect a lot with my clients, and blood sugar dysregulation can really create a lot of issues with that. It can create a lot of miscommunication, but also because of the way that blood sugar can also then impact cortisol. And we all know that cortisol is the stress hormone. And we think about, again, maybe a siloed approach would be like, oh, cortisol is produced when I feel mentally, emotionally stressed. Yes, that's a big time where it happens, but it also can actually spike when our blood sugar is also spiking too. So it's kind of like this two-way street. So when blood sugar spikes, cortisol spikes. When cortisol spikes, if we're mentally, emotionally stressed or whatever might be going on, we're just a little bit too busy, we can then actually spike our blood sugar. So I actually see this too with clients who are actually maybe they are eating in a pretty balanced way, but their lifestyle is not balanced, and they're actually still seeing high blood sugars. Maybe they're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, and they're actually seeing some interesting spikes that just don't really match what they would expect from what they're eating. So that's very interesting, and this is where we have to again really think about it's as many different things, but we just have to be kind of smart about that. And sorry, and maybe I'll say one more thing about how I think particularly with the blood sugar piece, and I'll say like again, blood sugar and metabolic health, they're so tightly connected that I almost see them as being one and the same. But if we have blood sugar dysregulation, especially like again, high levels of insulin, that can really just directly disrupt ovarian signaling. So especially this is very common in PCOS with women with that condition, where actually metabolic health is truly often like the more of like the root cause or the root driver rather than it being a reproductive issue, which it used to be kind of framed as being a reproductive issue, but really now it's being framed as it's really more of a metabolic condition that impacts the reproductive system. So we actually have to address the metabolic health rather than maybe going in and directly trying to tinker with the reproductive system.
That's funny.
So
That's what's similar with hypothalamic amenorrhea. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh,
but
yeah,
yeah, it's
absolutely.
often like, oh, there's this, we need to get this gonadotropin releasing hormones, implant in your body, and it'll send the system. It's like, or we can just like feed the body enough and rest enough, and then it'll turn back on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and with hypothalamic amenorrhea and PCOS, not all the time with PCOS are women totally missing their periods, but often it does happen. And it's so interesting how a lot of women are actually they're all thrown together, but it's like hypothalamic amenorrhea and PCOS are actually quite different. But at the end of the day, they still require nutrient density, good blood sugar regulation, but they're very, very different, but often leads to some of the similar symptoms in terms of like skipped periods and whatnot. But again, that's why it's like if we just kind of blanket treat all of them with maybe oral contraceptives or whatever it might be, it's like we are totally missing the root drivers of the two different conditions there.
Awesome. So what does one do, or how does one achieve, I guess, metabolic health? What does that, mean? What does that look like?
Yeah. So going back to those 3 or 4 maybe or those principles that I mentioned, blood sugar balance, nutrient sufficiency, or repleting nutrients if we have been deficient, and then reducing inflammation. And then again, I would say again that maybe that fourth bonus one will be addressing our gut health. For some people, that needs to be a very big part of their journey because their gut health maybe is a very clear and present issue in their body. For other people, it might just be like, hey, if I address my blood sugar, if I reduce inflammation generally, that'll clear up some of my gut stuff. Like maybe their gut's more of like a secondary issue compared to those things. For some women, though, it has become such a full-blown issue that it's actually the driver of a lot of their inflammation, or it actually can, our gut actually plays a big role in our metabolic health too. I mean, as we know, maybe we've heard of, GLP-1s out there nowadays, and there is a connection of GLP-1s actually work in the gut, and they're actually naturally produced in the gut. Of course, GLP-1 medications are quite a heftier dose than the natural production, but there is a really big, strong gut component that impacts metabolic health. And I actually oftentimes see this with clients who have really strong gut issues. We end up doing stool testing, addressing gut issues, and if the weight loss is a goal for them, it actually becomes possible finally for them to lose weight despite, before doing a lot of things that we thought would have created weight loss, but actually the gut was a big piece. So, but we can maybe just focus on those first three categories.
Sounds good.
So probably a broken record today, but as I mentioned, blood sugar balance is a huge, huge piece of that. And the reason for why blood sugar is just so important, and it's actually, I would say it's something that you could start doing like today. But the next time you eat a snack or a meal, you can start focusing on blood sugar balance. And I'll hopefully leave you guys with a really kind of simple focus for that, because if we think about nutrition, there's 1,000 things we could possibly focus on at any given moment. We sit down to eat, we could be trying to get a specific nutrient like vitamin C, like, oh, am I getting enough of that? Am I getting enough of this nutrient? Am I avoiding these certain things? There's a lot of different potential decisions that we could be making, and it becomes a lot of decision fatigue going on there. So I like to really make sure, how can we simplify it as best as possible while capturing the best nutritional quality also, but in the most simplified way. And the process I teach is actually trying to eat protein, fat, and fiber at every meal. And a lot of you probably have, heard of an approach similar to this, but that's really like the heart of it. If we can actually get enough proteins, especially healthy fat and fiber, those are the three main components of food that will slow down that rise in blood sugar. So this allows us to actually be able to have carbohydrates in a way that does not negatively impact our blood sugar. Because, I think carbs have been on a very interesting journey in the last 10, 15 years. And wellness culture, it's usually the conversation is carb or no carb. And it's like, they're somewhere in the middle with that. And
carbs are the enemy, which they're definitely not, especially for women.
Absolutely. Carbs can be really wonderful. So, and they actually there's a lot of other nutrients and carbohydrates. Now, there are certain foods that we could, or certain nutrients we can get in other foods that don't necessarily require carbohydrates, but on a very practical level, carbs end up just being a very easy way to get certain nutrients. So for most people, if they've done low carb before, maybe there was some success with, improving their insulin resistance. It's just this for sustainability, some carbohydrates usually work for most people. I've done a lot of both with different clients at maybe different stages of their healing journey. But again, as a long-term solution, yes, carbs typically end up being part of their journey. And, to varying degrees. For some people, maybe they still keep it lower. Some people are able to flex it up a little bit higher. But protein, fat, fiber really is the main three things that we need at our meals to support blood sugar balance, but also just to get enough nutrients too. So I mentioned that second category of nutrient sufficiency. It's like, okay, well, I mean, there's so many micronutrients, there's tons of minerals, tons of vitamins that we need. And then there's the macronutrients, the protein, the fat, and the carbs. I mean, it's too many things to think about at one meal. So what are the most important things? And if we focus on protein, fat, and fiber, we end up covering a lot of the bases with a lot of micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals. And we are impacting our blood sugar, we're impacting our gut health, and we are potentially likely reducing inflammation as well, just because, especially with the fiber piece, it's tricky to get enough fiber without eating real whole foods most of the time. So it kind of directs us in that right direction of like, well, if I'm choosing mostly real whole foods, with maybe some minimally processed foods, or again, very, very infrequently having very ultra processed foods, we're really focusing on those real whole foods, we're going to be getting foods that are already nutrient dense and really replete. So it's just kind of an approach to simplify it without, putting the good or bad labels on foods. It's just like, instead of focusing on what not to get, it's what do I really need to get at a meal? If I could at least check those things off, I'm good to go. And it allows us to show up at a party or show up at an event, or, whether we're at home or we're out at a restaurant, and we can start to focus on, okay, can I at least get enough protein, healthy fat, and fiber at this meal? Or at least protein. Sometimes at restaurants, fiber is in short supply. But at least if I could focus on those things and trying to keep, obviously the fourth criteria would be trying to keep carbohydrates to just one main serving at a meal, whether that's a medium-sized sweet potato or maybe a half cup of beans and maybe a little bit of rice mixed with that, but not, doing a roll of bread and a potato. Now we're kind of getting into territory of a bit of an overabundance of carbohydrates. This is the case for, I would say, still for most people. If we could keep it to that one main carbohydrate, ideally it's a real whole food carbohydrate because that's going to give us more nutrients and fiber already inherently in that food, then we are really setting ourselves up for steady blood sugar throughout the day, which actually ends up leading to steady energy. It reduces cravings. So it's a lot of times cravings and poor energy do often come back to, in some degree, blood sugar imbalances going on. And again, this could be for someone, they don't have to be a very unhealthy, or they don't have to even be at the point of, pre-diabetes or diabetes to have blood sugar imbalances. Again, this can happen for years in a way that's just causing someone to not feel great. They're not feeling their best. And we want to rectify that. And this also can really impact weight, because when we are spiking our blood sugar, insulin hormone spikes with it, and that actually suppresses the ability to take fat out of storage. So it's literally like a one-way street. When our insulin and blood sugar is high, we can deposit fat in storage, but we can't take it out. And this is a real problem for women who are trying to lose weight. The blood sugar balance, I always say, has to be one of the prerequisites before they even try to see that scale change for them. But that's also, even for women who don't necessarily want weight loss, we still want to be able to use our fat stores as an additional source of energy for ourselves, so that we don't feel like we have to constantly be eating food throughout the day. We should feel very satiated between our meals. And again, even blood sugar stability creates that satiation, that satiety between meals, so that we don't have, we can go 3 to 4 hours between our meals, which, guess what? If we're eating at 8 a.m., 12 p.m., and maybe, 5 or 6 p.m., like maybe have a snack late afternoon, but that allows us to have a very nice schedule for the day of eating, and instead of food being this constant throughout the day, because we're kind of always on the hook for needing to address our blood sugar.
And that's something too, that I know I've noticed in my own experience. I've worked with registered dietitians when I was in college, and then I worked with the same one I worked with in college. Actually, I contacted her again after I had my twins when I was postpartum, because I was just so hungry. I was nursing twins too, and was not eating enough and was not eating balanced enough. And she just made some minor tweaks, some suggestions. And yeah, it's amazing. For me, it was actually I was not eating enough carbohydrate, and to just have my meals be more balanced, I felt like my mood, it was really this feeling of like constantly high strung. And as soon as like my meals were more balanced, I mean, it was literally almost like at my next meal, I just felt like, to your point, my brain felt calm, like, oh, we have what we need. Thank you. Like, now we're not thinking about food anymore, and we're not hungry anymore. Like, it's amazing how, which just kind of breaks your heart when you think of all the people throughout the world who are hungry a lot and are malnourished, how much just proper nourishment can help calm you and help you mentally focus on kind of what needs to be done. And in a season when you're, for women who are in their reproductive years trying to have children and having children, having mental stability is really important. And there's already a lot of things tugging at you in your day. So having food not be one of them is really helpful. Like having food kind of be, my sister and I talk about this a lot, like kind of like an afterthought, like, oh, okay, I need to sit and eat lunch. Like I will stop. I need to feed myself. But then I eat, and then I can go about the rest of my day because I've got like so much other stuff on my plate. So anyway, I can't speak highly enough about working with professionals like yourself, because even if you think you might be doing it well, and like I know a lot, I feel like I know a lot, I'm a real kind of like health nut nerd, still having someone to speak into the situation and say, I think we should tweak this and this and this and maybe consider this, it can really move the meter as far as your sanity and your health and how you're feeling. So tell me a little bit about, I guess, like the patient or the client population. And if there's anything you want to say to that, feel free. But the client population you work with, do you work with a lot of women who are having cycle problems and cycle issues? Do they come to you for that and kind of help, they got diagnosed with PCOS and their doctor wants to put them on a diet, but they don't know what diet to go on, or they have endometriosis. And so what yeah, what does that client population look like, and how do you kind of start working with them?
Yeah, well, yes to all of those different
Okay.
populations, but I would say in the last 2 years, I've been really focusing a lot more on fertility as a goal for most clients. Now, that still encapsulates women who are having cycle issues, maybe PCOS or endometriosis, but I do tend to work with a lot of women now who have fertility as a goal. Some women, most of those women are struggling to get pregnant. They've been trying to conceive for a while. Um, a lot of those women I work with are already working with some really great practitioners, maybe like yourself, to, support, be able to really cycle well on that, and also maybe hopefully working with a really great doctor who is well versed in maybe restorative reproductive medicine, or some other women who maybe have none of that support and they're just working with their OB or whoever, whatever person they've been working with, and they really need additional support there. So yeah, so fertility as a goal is a huge area which I work with, but I also work with other women who are not at that stage yet. Maybe they're single women in their 20s and they have PCOS or they have endometriosis, maybe either pre or post surgery, or they're not even aware that surgery is on the radar for them, or could be. Um, but ultimately, I do end up working a lot of the clients I work with, I would say, also have a goal for weight loss. I just tend to attract that type of client. And I think that I don't know if it's still present nowadays, but there used to be, and maybe still a little bit pervasive, there used to be this idea that like if you're trying to support your cycle, you can't also support weight loss. Like weight loss is always going to be a deterrent to your cycle. It's always going to steal from your reproductive health. And now maybe someone were like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Shouldn't weight loss, if someone, is could use some weight loss, like that would be really supportive of them. Absolutely. However, it used to be really common. I think it probably came from the idea that in the 90s, early, thousand or two, sorry, 2000s, the ways in which people tried to support weight loss, and maybe even still do nowadays. There's still a lot of big name programs, I'm not going to name them out there, that just don't really um, they kind of miss the mark when it comes to really, really supportive, healthy, appropriate weight loss that actually allows the body to become more metabolically healthy through that process. I think a lot of weight loss techniques used to be very depleting. It was reduce, 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 go low calorie as much as possible without thinking about where is your body at? How are you already actually nutrient deficient already? And now you're going to actually put more fuel on that fire of nutrient deficiency by just reducing food intake even more without really thinking about nutrient quality or nutrient density, and also thinking about someone's context of like, where have they been thus far? And I mean, just quick anecdote, I would say I've worked with plenty of women before who are coming to me tracking either eating 1,000 to 1,200 calories per day, and they're still not losing weight. And let me tell you, for almost any woman out there, even if you're a very short, petite woman, most women need minimum, I would say 1,200 minimum, but most women need much more than that just to keep the lights on, to make sure everything's kind of running smoothly. And then they're still optimal above that too. So for those women, they were eating in a huge calorie deficit and yet they weren't losing weight. That always immediately is a red flag of your metabolism is not working efficiently. And that is what we need to address. It is not being in a calorie deficit. And I just, again, to kind of speak a little more to the weight loss real quick, because I think it's probably, something on the minds of a lot of listeners, is a calorie deficit, while it is eventually required to lose weight consistently over time, that is just physics. We have to have your body has to have it cannot have a surplus, and it has to have something to burn. It has to have the impetus to actually go burn that body fat. But it can't just do that if it's nutrient deficient, because weight loss is actually quite metabolically demanding in terms of, or very nutrient demanding. It's not a passive just shedding, like I don't know, like a spider. What animals molt their skin? It's not just like,
Like
just,
a snake,
shed.
right?
Yeah, snake, thank you. They don't just shed it off. It actually is very it's a very active, dynamic process requiring a ton of nutrients to all be working together. And it requires really good blood sugar control. Because as I mentioned, even if we're just kind of spiking our blood sugar, not all the time, but pretty frequently, and our insulin's kind of always running a little bit higher, or we're kind of constantly snacking throughout the day too, our insulin's always kind of in a little bit upper range. It's never kind of coming back down to baseline. It is virtually impossible to tap into body fat stores at that point because, again, insulin kind of puts a block on weight loss while it's running high, but as it comes back down, that's when we have the ability to actually support weight loss again. I just like to say that because I think for so many women, this is a lot of women are at their last rope. I mean, they've done a ton of programs, they've done a lot of different methods to support weight loss in the past, and they feel really defeated with it, and they almost don't even know if. But they almost think that even though those metrics haven't worked in the past, they almost feel like that's all they know of, so they kind of try to do that again. And it's like, hey, we have to really flip the script here a little bit, and again, kind of go back to those. What are those prerequisites? I'd say for weight loss, but really what they are, this goes back to those three foundations of metabolic health. And those three foundations are supported for, again, for any woman who is looking to have better energy, reduce inflammation, I would say just overall feel better. That's not a very detailed term, but and then have better cycles. And then if they also want to lose weight, doing those prerequisites, as I said, are the first step, and then they could be in a calorie deficit. But that's a separate, they could do that separately. But in the meantime, they could be supporting their cycles. They could be rectifying their energy. And I'll just say one more thing about energy is when someone is having poor energy, that is almost always a sign that something, that their metabolism could be better optimized. Now, there's a lot of reasons why energy, if we have a poor night of sleep, yes, we're going to have worse energy the next day. Or if, we're a mom with little kiddos, like, yeah, sleep is, energy is something hard to come by. However, I would say chronically, if we're having low energy, we always want to think about, what about my metabolic health? What else do I need to rectify here? And for my clients, I always tell them, out of all the different goals I have, at the very least, if your energy starts to improve, which it should, based on this method, within a week or two, I would say with even just a few days, that is always a good sign that you're moving in the right direction. That's always like the first big win, because as I mentioned, the definition of metabolic health and metabolism, those are all the processes that use and burn or convert food into energy. So it's energy producing, right? So sometimes we think about energy on our human body level as being just like I need more caffeine, right? It's like, I need more sleep. That's all I need. But really, as a total, it's actually the sum total of what's going on inside our cells too. So if we're feeling like we are now having better energy naturally, wow, that is a sign that everything's moving in the right direction. And you can hopefully expect that your cycles will follow suit, although they do take a little bit longer than a lot of the other symptoms. Our cycles might lag a little bit just because they're so dependent on like the cycle prior and what's going on prior. So it takes a little bit more time. But that's why I like to kind of make sure my clients know what those initial wins are going to be, because they know, okay, at least I'm moving in the right direction. I'm seeing improvements. Hopefully my cycles will then follow suit after we work on this.
And I've heard it said that when we're looking at trying to correct, menstrual cycle issues and improving ovulation and healthy menses, that, giving ourselves like a 3-month window is a good like time frame until we start to see more substantial, improvements in that area in particular. Not that we won't have other improvements more immediate, but to give ourselves that kind of window of really seeing like, okay, is what I'm doing having a direct impact? And that's why we love, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Laura Bryden, but we've had her on the podcast, and she always talks about the period as the monthly report card. And so, giving yourselves a couple of months is like when you develop steady habits and you're implementing new things, you got to give yourself a little bit of time, and then you get your report card to kind of see if things have paid off. So yeah, give yourself some time, I think, with these types of therapies and lifestyle treatments. But the other part too is that, even if, you're doing these things and you're going to have so many other benefits in other areas of your health and your life, it's only going to support the continued correction of any type of menstrual cycle issues you're having. So say now, okay, metabolic health is strong. We're still having something off here, and doctors find, okay, well, we're having some endometriosis. So we can do the metabolic stuff until we're blue in the face, but you still need to go in there surgically and remove that endometrial tissue. But now our inflammation is down, lifestyle stuff has changed. So your recovery, your post-op is going to be great, and your chances of conceiving are going to be like so much higher because you're overall just so much healthier. So Emily and I talk a lot about that on the podcast of like, especially when we're in a season of trying to achieve a pregnancy, you want to achieve a pregnancy yesterday. And so nothing is moving fast enough. And it can kind of seem like, well, if this doesn't lead to a positive pregnancy test tomorrow, what's the point? And we always go back to your health is the point. Your health is the point, and that is the focus. Focusing on the baby is not going to help you mentally, physically, or emotionally really heal, And so keeping that understanding, that longing, that desire, good, wonderful. We want to be seeking it, but we have to start with health, because the healthier you are, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to achieve and carry a healthy pregnancy.
Absolutely.
So maybe you can touch a little bit about Emily. I know that she really wanted to hear some of your thoughts about CGM monitoring. She's experienced, PCOS and recovering from that. And she was just curious kind of what role CGM wearing and the information do you use that with your clients? If so, how you use that and what your thoughts are about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think CGMs are CGMs are continuous glucose monitors, and those are, if you've seen people wearing them, they usually go on like your upper arm. These are sensors worn for 2 weeks, so they do have a very, very tiny little needle that does go into your skin, but it's very safe. Usually, most people are like, wow, I didn't even feel it as it entered in, and you wear it for 2 weeks consistently. And then you are actually able, usually through like an app, you're actually able to see how your blood sugar is rising or falling throughout the day as you are eating, sleeping, stressing, not stressing, right? So again, that's not just about food. There's actually other things that actually make things rise and fall. So yeah, I think CGMs are a fantastic tool. I use them, sometimes with my clients. I think it really depends on the person if they want more data. Sometimes my clients are like, they're doing a lot of blood work, they're doing a lot of testing, and they're not sure if they want even more data like that. I think I'm maybe a data nerd, so like the more data, the better for me to see. But yeah, they're really useful. They can also just, I think, for someone who maybe is really like, hey, I'm really invested now in blood sugar balance. Like I love this approach. I love focusing on this. I'm seeing some benefits. I just feel like maybe I'm missing some things here. I want to just see a little bit more about like what's really going on in my body, because people do have different responses to different foods. So, I could say generally if someone has, I don't know, a donut and randomly at 2 p.m. in the afternoon with no protein, fat, or fiber to kind of slow down that rise in blood sugar, we're probably going to see a rise in their blood sugar quite a bit for most people. But for some people, maybe they'll see a higher rise, and others not as much of a high of a rise. So like there are those personalized insights that we can get from wearing CGMs, and that can be really useful. And for some people, it's they sometimes you probably, some listeners, you probably know that if you're someone who really needs to see the data to kind of get that motivation, like, okay, now my eyes have seen it, right? Like, if I could see it, I can actually make some changes. Yeah, and it could just really, really help. It's also like if I have my clients wear them, I'll say like try to maybe wear two of them, so for a total of 4 weeks. And during 4 weeks, like every week, we can kind of do a new experiment of like, okay, week one, eat whatever in a sense, like have a kind of a weird week and just kind of see how it goes. Like, whoa, okay, my levels were all over the place. Check and see on nights where you happen to have poor sleep or you just didn't get enough sleep. What is your blood sugar like the next day? How are your cravings like the next day? Likely going to be a little bit wonky because poor sleep actually, just one night of poor sleep can actually increase or decrease insulin sensitivity pretty significantly just by the next day. Now that can change and we can reset that too, but pretty important. And then also like stress, I think this is maybe one of the biggest factors, because I think stress is not an easy thing to maybe address for a lot of people, or maybe just like a chaotic lifestyle, but realizing, okay, maybe it's not just about the food that I'm eating, it's also what is my day-to-day like? Am I kind of in fight or flight mode, you know, 8 out of the 12 hours that I am out and about all day long? That's a lot. And that we might actually see that reflect as being my blood sugar is just kind of up a little bit all day long. And that could really be a sign of, yes, well, that's because cortisol is just high up a little bit. We mentioned that cortisol and blood sugar have they're they impact each other directly, right? So that could really be a big one. So yeah, I think it's a great tool. I will say for anyone though, I'm going to want them to start on that protein, fat, fiber method first, because we just need like that one is simple. It's free technically. You can buy the food, but it's free and it's pretty simple, and it's a long-term solution too. And most people don't want to be wearing a CGM long term unless they're, type 1 diabetic or something, and they need to monitor that. So we want to do those long-term sustainable features first and then kind of add on additional tools if needed.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think it's so interesting, when I hear you talking about whether like watching the monitor kind of give us exactly like real data in real time, or just our kind of like our lived experience when we kind of go about our day and our lives, whether it's with stress from, external factors or stress because our body is not being properly nourished in the way that it needs to be, how it clings to, which is funny. It's the opposite of what we desire, right? Which is like a healthy body size. It will fight against us. Like our body really doesn't desire to be stressed. Like if we give our body what it needs, which is so counter kind of, you know, diet exercise culture of like, stress the body, stress the body, stress the body. It's like, but the body actually just wants like it's like a Goldilocks, like the perfect amount of stress. And then it will respond by balancing out, by having a healthy body weight and a healthy metabolism, and everything will kind of work as it should. I just find that so beautiful about the way the body is made. And also funny because I feel like it's counter how we operate, you know, like we just, yeah, I guess it's sad a little bit too. Like we push the body so much. And especially as females, I think sometimes we get that messaging of like deprivation, depriving more, instead of what I've heard you say, which is like, well, we need to fuel appropriately, right? We need to actually give the body enough so it feels safe. And only when it feels safe and it's functioning, then we should look at, you know, entering into some type of a calorie deficit, but still nourishing our body well during that time. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I think getting that message out there so that especially women, especially moms, I think because I'm about to have a baby and entering into the postpartum season, I'm just really focusing a lot on a couple things. I have a few different goals with this guy, but one of them in particular is just healing really well and nourishing really well during that fourth trimester time after having a baby, and making sure that, you know, my body just did a lot for 9 months. It just did a lot with birth. Like it's deserving of being well taken care of, you know, of rest and of proper nourishment, all those things. So yeah, I think sometimes, especially because of my temperament, like even talking like that, I'm like, oh, that sounds so weak. Like, but it is true. Like I don't know. I think it's really an important message to get out there. So I'm grateful for all the work you're doing. I will link to Wonderfully Made in the show notes, Wonderfully Made Nutrition. Is there anything on the site or any kind of work that you're doing that you'd love to highlight here? I know I like your the PFF, the protein, fat, and fiber. It's such an easy kind of way to think about forming our meals. But is there anything else kind of on the website or work that you're doing that you want to kind of shout out or share with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll just, shout out some of the free guides that I have. So one of the main guides I do have is my protein, fat, fiber guide, and it is extensive. Like it's very practical. There's cheat sheets in there. Like I have a lot of all my clients use it too. So it's something that like it's real. Like if you want to get started with this method, do it. Go get that free guide, download it. Again, like print it out, hang some of the cheat sheets on your fridge or inside your cabinet, and just have it as a reference point when you're building meals, or especially with the fiber sheet. I have a whole sheet on fiber in there because I think once people start getting into like, okay, am I trying to get enough protein? It actually becomes pretty easy to do it once we're pretty intentional about the protein, but the fiber is always like a tricky piece for people. It's just maybe not something that we've been really taught and before. So yeah, it's a really helpful guide. And I have some intro information in that guide about like, again, why, we probably what everything you heard today, but just kind of going back into like why blood sugar balance is so important for fertility and really women's health and just our cycles overall, and that connection between, which I don't think I'm harp on too much today, but blood sugar and cortisol, but also blood sugar and inflammation. Like again, these things go hand in hand. They directly feed back into each other. So it's like, so that's a great guide. Again, very practical. I would say definitely a place to start. And then I do have actually another maybe an issue I often run into with my clients is once they're getting started with this process, really end up being like meal planning ends up being one of the largest issues. I mean, I do functional medicine. I do a ton of, we do functional lab testing. We do a lot of different things together, a lot of like really deep dives into, health and whatnot. But so much of what we actually need to work on really is the tried and true, the day in, the day out. What am I putting on my plate? What am I putting in my cart? What is my plan for the week? So I have a whole meal planning guide. It's not your typical meal planning guide. It's not like here's what you should, make for Sunday through Saturday. That's not what it is, but it's actually the process of it. Because I think that a lot of people end up skipping certain steps in the process and then it kind of starts to fall apart. So that, and then the one last guide that I'll mention is my top 10 nutrients for fertility. I mean, there's a lot of nutrients we need for fertility, but these are actually the top nutrients that are often not eaten enough of by women. So these are like the top nutrients of concern, I would say, for most women to support fertility, but also just their health overall. So those are nutrients I often work with most clients on repleting, and I have very practical information in there about foods that are the best options for those, or even some supplementation if that is sometimes supportive for some people.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I know this is a little bit in reverse, but maybe to close us out, you can share a little bit about how you became a registered dietitian and kind of got into this field.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was really interested in nutrition in high school. I'm actually really grateful to my freshman biology teacher for, end of the year, kind of, we're fizzling out with the different chapters, and she had us go home and, type up like a one-page summary of what we learned about trans fat. At the time, trans fat isn't really as prevalent nowadays, thank goodness. But I had never even heard of that, never realized it, and I, did some researching on it for a night, and my mind was floored that this man-made substance was in our food. I've been eating it, didn't realize that it's, really, really not good for us. And it just really opened my eyes to nutrition. I just kind of wanted to learn more. So yeah, I just had a real, just natural desire to learn about nutrition in high school. But particularly with the idea of how can nutrition actually like change the course of our health? How can it correct disease? How can it prevent disease? And then as I went to college, I actually kind of learned what a dietitian was and realized like, oh, I don't necessarily want to be working in a lab. I actually really want to work with people and really bring that research to them. So I became a dietitian, and I'm really grateful for that process. Naturally, actually, throughout that time, I actually was developing a lot of gut and inflammation issues. I actually also had some binge eating disorder prior to that, which I think kind of really set the stage for a lot of the gut issues. Absolutely, because I think I was really hurting my gut for many years. But a lot of gut issues that ended up, I say, becoming full body inflammation. Never had a lot of direct diagnoses. It was not autoimmune conditions, which was shocking to me because it was kind of, and then all the criteria for it. But yeah, so over the years, I mean, I just was suffering, for day in and day out for many, many years. And it really led me to more of like a functional medicine approach, or really just trying to get to the root causes and really understanding that when we have a root cause approach, it's multifactorial. We have to get into the nuances of it. We have to be, I would say, you're conscientious of not saying, oh, it's just this one thing. I kind of getting out of that siloed approach, because even a root cause approach sometimes even people can have that temptation to kind of say, oh, it's just this one thing. It's like, actually, it's multiple things. So that led me down the road of many gut protocols, but again, kind of eventually realizing it had to be a multifactorial approach to really support myself. And I'm in much better health today after much of that. But that really gave me a deeper passion for root cause solutions. And I ended up having to do a lot more study because even my conventional training was not, it was just the start, and I had to really even learn much, much more beyond that. So, and that really led me to really love working with women and realizing that, gosh, some of the most common issues are cycle related issues for women. And so much of it's just really not often great care still out there. And yeah, it just really gave me a heart for working with women. Gut health was like a big specialty of mine, and it still is. So I kind of mentioned it today, but inflammation, blood sugar balance, realizing like, wow, that actually helped me balancing my blood sugar, and just having the approach I mentioned today, the protein, fat, fiber approach, I would say like was a huge impetus for healing my body, giving me my hunger signals back, reducing cravings, really reducing that binge eating disorder. I think a lot of spiritual healing was part of that too. But yeah, so just that's my journey, and eventually really, again, felt even called to hyper focusing more on even fertility support, because being able to help women to bear life and bring new humans into this world is maybe the coolest thing we can do with our health. And I just don't want women to feel like they have only closed doors, or it's, I don't want them to think that it's only unexplained. There is explanation, and there are things we could absolutely do, and we just have to make sure that we are, dotting all of our I's, crossing all of our T's, and really making sure we're looking at everything and not getting stuck in that silo.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you're listening, if you're a mom, or if you're in a season of trying to achieve a pregnancy, and if you're a mom and you have daughters who are having, cycle issues, someone like Victoria might be a really great part of a healthcare team that's helping to support kind of cycle restoration and getting ovulation back to what it should be, which should be healthy, with healthy menses every month. And so reach out to her. I'll definitely link her page and those guides, everything in the show notes. So thank you so much for your time today, Victoria. I really appreciate it. I know it's going to be really helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, take care, guys. We'll see you in the next episode.
That wraps up another episode of the NFP Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and empowering. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please connect with us by sending us an email with your questions and stories to thenfpshow@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with more insights, tips, and heartfelt conversations about natural family planning. Until then, love responsibly.